Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. I don't think my dog is really a dog. I'm currently hiding in my closet shaking in fear. I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if there's a formatting issue or grammar, but I don't really give a fuck right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report this to the authorities or anyone, please. I don't know what to fucking do. During April of 2018, I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hellhole and into my loving home. She was a border collie mix, and her name was Nellie. I don't know what the fuck happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid little pup when I first took her home. I remember she was inside for at least 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept in my bed that night, and for many more nights to come. She only weighed maybe 6 or 7 kilograms when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school, I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work, she would rush to greet me with her lead dangling from her mouth, her tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was also an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul, whose wife had recently passed away from breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but never looked a day over 40. He liked to throw a barbecue for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor with bringing food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning on the 5th, I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on the lamp. She was stood about a meter from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To her surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would have been the end of it. A few more days pass, and on the 9th it happened again. Early hours of the morning and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up and wanted to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we would go for a walk through the woods. When I let her out that night, she walked to about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee, and she started her way back to the house. This is when things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed at the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back on it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked, then made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch and put on my red bands, but then the trees started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called out her name and waited. About a minute later, she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go on walks. She cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change up her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off into the woods to go hunting for rabbits or anything she could get her paws on. I also noticed she began to get bigger. Not fat bigger, because as she got bigger, it looked like she got skinnier. Then she stopped playing with her toys, that weirded me out the most because her beloved squeaky duck toy I got for her the day she came home was always with her inside the house. Now it lay gathering dust in the corner of my room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together Paul would throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. That day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with. That makes it sound better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all thought it was because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders, violent and bloody murders. We were absolutely shit scared then. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to. A text every hour or so just to check in, or maybe a phone call or two. He told me I should keep the key for my gun safe in the lock in case of an emergency. I listened. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of March. I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grabbed a flashlight and my phone ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At the time, I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open when I clearly remember closing before I went to bed that night, nor did I notice Nellie was missing. I yanked open my back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky, completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost a glowing red. Its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It felt like so long ago, even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground of my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake, and I saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye, and I saw her. Her. My sweet girl. My Nellie. Or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifyingly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. That was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dived into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself in dirty washing and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a few million years. It walked, or skulked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter across the hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a fucking thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed to fucking bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the walls. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I heard I skulk off and leave the house. Probably to finish eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I can hear sirens outside, but I'm too afraid to leave lest that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The inky thing I could do for the last few hours was type this out and do research. But it didn't make sense. I Googled everything I remembered about that thing. I got a result that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make fucking sense. I read pages upon pages of this fucking thing, looked at artwork, folklore. Everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location of the creature is found in the United States, usually on Native American land. So what in the living is a goddamn Wendigo doing in rural New Zealand? Second story. Suicide woods. Everyone's heard of the so-called suicide forest in Japan, but hardly anyone's familiar with the locally named suicide woods in Fairfield, Connecticut. It's probably a good thing, too. The deaths are disturbing not only by their nature, but because there have been so many of them over the years. Growing up, I heard scary stories about the woods behind Lake Mohegan. We all did. Rumors of devil-worshipping cults ran like wildfire through every school hallway and cafeteria. Some kid said he was fishing back there with his uncle when they discovered a dead goat by a rock face with its guts arranged in a pentagram. Another kid talked about blood-sucking demons in the trees. Our parents were always quick to dispel the more ridiculous rumors, but they couldn't deny the suicides. The suicides were facts of life in our town. I wouldn't be writing this if I thought it was an unfortunate, but natural phenomenon, like with the forest suicides in Japan. To be honest, I'd forgotten about it all until I came back for my 30th high school reunion last spring. A few old classmates and I got to talking, and we decided to take a hike through the wooded area the following day. Keep in mind, the place is absolutely gorgeous. It's heavily wooded, but well-maintained paths run throughout. A clear, clean river cuts through the woods, and a series of cascades and rapids terminate in a deep, tranquil pool. Kids and families would swim there frequently during the summer, despite the unpleasant stigma of suicides and hauntings hanging over the area. On a beautiful, hot summer day, it's simply too pretty over there to worry about that stuff. We headed out around 7:30 the following morning. Only one of our original 6 ended up actually answering the phone and still wanted to go, but that was fine with me. Todd Soto and I were pretty close in high school, so I was looking forward to spending the morning with him so we could catch up. We walked along the scenic path around the lake and into the woods. We followed the river, and soon we reached the Cascades. The rushing water was gorgeous and invigorating. Someone who'd gotten up even earlier than we had was fishing off the rocks. He waved, and we greeted him in turn. The woods quieted as we progressed further upriver. The sound of wildlife replaced the rushing water. It was a truly spectacular day. Todd told me about his business and his family while I discussed my writing career and waning popularity. All in all, we were having a great time. Todd stopped to grab some water from his backpack, and I gazed out over the now distant lake. I heard my friend behind me rummaging through his stuff. Then he muttered, "What the hell?" I turned around. A hair-thin stream of black fluid had fallen out of the tree onto Todd. He'd moved to the side, but it was on his head and neck. We both looked up, but couldn't see what had produced the stream. "Well, that's gross," Todd remarked, and he reached into his backpack for a handkerchief. I kept looking in the tree while Todd wiped himself off. He went to put the handkerchief back, then pulled his Swiss Army knife from his pocket. It was one of the really big ones that I'd wanted to get for a while. I was jealous. "Hey, cool knife," I began, but then something happened. It was very bad and very fast. Todd opened the knife, and with no hesitation, plunged it into the side of his neck. A brilliant fountain of blood erupted from the puncture. His mouth formed a hideous smile of calm beneficence. His knees wobbled a bit, but he didn't fall. I shouted his name and rushed forward, but he pushed me away. Hard. I crashed onto the dirt and scrambled to my feet. Todd was now standing directly underneath the tree that had dripped on him. He pulled the knife across the softest parts of his neck, while gurgling, "What was mine is now yours. I repay your kiss with my blood. Take it all. Swallow me." Once more, I tried to stop him, but got pushed away again. But not by Todd. Something had descended from the tree and was dangling in front of my friend. It was long and black and streaked with gray veins and white blotches. It was no wider than a cigarette lighter, but when it struck me, its strength was enormous. I knew at least one of my ribs had cracked, and I remained on the ground, clutching my chest. The thing spasmed and twitched before touching down on Todd's gouting throat. A lime green proboscis slid from its tip and began lapping up the blood. Todd had fallen to his knees, but he was still carving his neck ever wider. His grinning mouth moved in the same shapes of the words he'd been gurgling, but nothing but blood came out. Soon that also stopped, as he severed his esophagus. Then he fell on his face. The thing in the tree extended and pushed down into Todd's wound. For minutes, I stared, too horrified to move, as it gulped my friend's blood. Its veins pulsed, and it swelled obscenely before turning translucent, then transparent, then invisible. I heard the leaves rustling as it retracted back, and all that was left was me and my dead friend. I pulled myself to my feet and ran, wincing with agony as the broken ends of my ribs rubbed against one another. I reached for my phone, but realized I'd given it to Todd to hold in his backpack. I kept running until I reached the road. I flagged down a car and had them call the police. They arrived and brought me to the station. I was questioned, and I told them everything, despite knowing how insane it sounded. They asked for my phone number and home address so they could contact me if they needed anything else. Days went by. They didn't call. They didn't visit. After a week, I went online to the Connecticut Post website. I did a search for Todd's name. Lo and behold, there he was, listed as another unfortunate and preventable suicide in the Lake Mohegan woods. Third story. I found a house buried in the woods. I'm sort of a nature guy. I say sort of because I'm not a nature guy, but I spend a considerable amount of time outside. It's mostly downloading music and going for hikes in my area. That sort of nature guy. That is why I consider myself fortunate that my backyard borders miles of forest. This is fortunate because I live in a very suburban area where most people are rationed only a few feet of neatly groomed yard. My backyard isn't large, but once I cross the threshold of brush and trees, I'm met with unearthed stones that create mock canyons. I get to walk along skinny, running creeks of water. Some of the rock formations are so colossal the area where the rock meets the soil juts up and forms overhangs that I can sit under to get out of the heat. It really is a gift to have all of this behind my house. I had never had a reason to feel anything but serenity out there, but as of a few months ago, that serenity has taken on the guise of uneasy anticipation that something horrible happened out there. About 3 months ago, I went as deep into the woods as I had ever gone. I probably made my way through the trail westwards for about 3 hours. I was following a creek that was a stone or two away from being dammed up, but it muscled on anyway when something caught my attention. There was the base of a man-made stone structure. I went over to investigate. The structure was a dark gray rock that had patches of green moss running up it. I thought to myself that it must have been an old fire pit, or maybe a well of sorts, but what the hell did I know? There was no one around for miles, so the structure had to be really old. I was about to keep on following the creek when it clicked with me. The structure was a chimney, the top of a chimney. At first I was in disbelief. There was no way it could be that. I started to dig away at the base of the chimney, and it kept on revealing more and more chimney no matter how much dirt I moved away. I eventually got down on my knees and started moving the dirt away using a nearby rock to break it up. I went on, strangely invested in seeing its end when I struck roof shingles. Yes, a few inches below the dirt were the roof shingles. I didn't know whether to think it was cool or terrifying. I hadn't decided yet. I did know that I was going to come back with some towels and move more dirt away, because at the time I hadn't been completely freaked. The next weekend I hiked back out to the house. The house had been on my mind almost obsessively. I made my way out with a newly bought pickaxe and a shovel from my garage. After a pretty rough few hours, I made it to the house. I was able to remember its location using the creek as a guiding reference. For the rest of the day, I dug at the ground at a grueling pace, yet sure enough a full-size roof was being revealed. When I had just enough time to make it back before sundown, I decided to go back home, but I left the tools propped up on the chimney. I was exhausted and drinking some water I had brought when I noticed how eerily quiet everything was. No animal chatter. No wind, just the persistent trickle of the creek. No, there was one more sound. It was muffled, but I followed it. It was a radio, and it was coming from the house. I pressed up against the roof and listened hard. The hum of a radio could be heard inside the house. Someone had to be living inside the house. I suddenly felt a sense of dread. I felt a sense of being miles from home and potentially not alone. I left immediately and made a leg-numbing trek back to my house. About 2 months later, I went back one last time. Curiosity got the best of me, and I wish I could say that I was smart and forgot about it. But come on, could you forget about this? I made it out to the house. It was the exact same way I'd left it, tools and all. There was no radio playing, though. I had gone out there early, so I had time. I got to work on digging out the roof. I dug a pathway to the edge of where I thought the roof would be so I could dig down the side of the house. Relatively quickly, I made it to the edge and began down. I worked fervently and with great focus until I had about an inch of window exposed. I stuck my head into the hole to press up against the tiny sliver of the window, but I couldn't make out anything. I dug for nearly an hour more until I had the window almost completely exposed. I pushed up on the window, and to my surprise it slid open with ease as if it were new. The earth I was laying in fell away, and I tumbled down into the house. It was dark, but my eyes were adjusting. I sat up. The light outside illuminated the room a bit, and to my shock the whole house was completely furnished and seemed like it was lived in and managed. The room I was in must have been a guest room. It was decorated in a very 2000s era fashion. Somehow the house had airflow too, and with my eyes now adjusted I made my way to the bedroom door. I grabbed the knob and slowly turned it. The door didn't even creak as I peeked into the hallway. I couldn't see much, but I heard something. This time it wasn't a radio, it was someone crying. The hallway had an off-white colored carpet flooring and a wooden staircase that led to the presumed first floor. Down the stairs I could hear the gentle cries of a woman. I froze up. I wanted to call out for her, but I knew I had crossed a personal boundary of mine hours ago when I decided to come out here. I must have been locked up for a minute or so when a new sound was born, footsteps, and they were coming up the stairs fast. I quickly shut the door and made a hard turn towards the window. I scrambled anxiously up the dirt mound that had let itself into the room through the window. Whatever was coming after me had opened the door and was gaining on me, but did not make a sound besides the heavy footsteps. I got out the window and slid it shut right as something pounded up against it. The whole time the woman downstairs never stopped crying. I didn't stop. I climbed out of the hole and tore off through the woods. The whole way back I felt followed by a sense of hopelessness and dread. I don't remember much from the run back, but when I got home I passed out on my couch. I woke up a few hours later, and the sun had set. I locked all of my doors and window, scared that thing from the house would follow me, and then took a shower. As of now, nothing more has come of the house. I did call the police and reported the incident about a week ago, so I expect to hopefully hear from them soon. The uneasiness of my experience with that house has kept me out of those woods for good. In fact, I have kind of taken a hiatus on hiking alone. If there are ever updates, I can let you all know, but for now that is everything. Fourth story. What we saw in the woods. Why the hell would y'all even want to go out there? My grandmother would say in that thick Texan drawl before spitting a wad of dip into her snuff mug. She was like a firecracker, always startling you with a pop even though you were the one who lit the match. My grandpa Joe, a towering man with calloused mitts for hands, would grunt in assent and flip to the next page of his morning paper. I miss them. My brother Jesse and I are cleaning out their house after my grandmother passed, reminiscing on the mostly fond memories we shared. We were raised here, taken by our mother in the dead of night to flee the terrors of my drunken father. My father wouldn't find us in the vast countryside of Texas, and if he did stumble upon the needle in the haystack, he would have to answer to Big Joe, who preferred to settle disputes with his fists. My mom made the right call. Dad was never able to find us. Too many tiny towns, like the one we escaped to. But if there's anything I've learned, the most evil things can happen in the smallest places. My grandparents left us the house, reopening a chapter in our lives that we desperately wanted to keep closed. I put it on the market and received a quick and generous offer, but only for the land. The house would be demolished, and our memories would be buried under wood and rubble. I think we'd prefer it that way. Behind the house is the vast East Texas forest, but our neck of the woods is a little different. Most folks from other towns use their woods. They hike, fish, or even camp in the beautiful landscape that only a higher power could have created. We don't go in ours. There's a small trail where you can let your kids play, but soon it ends abruptly, and you're staring at a long metal chain with a rusty sign, which firmly reads, "Keep out." No one really knows why the section of the forest is closed off. If you asked a city official, they'd say it's because the area is privately owned by a real estate developer, though no one can remember the company's name. There were rumors that several people went missing over the last 40 years because there are no trail markings maintained paths, and that's why we're not allowed to explore. There were also whispers that a commune of Pentecostals resided deeper into the forest and that they valued privacy and the Second Amendment. The story is that the original church in town splintered back in the 1920s, and the other half set up their own community. Now, this was actually true and documented by parishioners of that time, but there's no evidence that the different factions retreated into the woods. It didn't stop rabble-rousers from claiming they had crossed the boundary and explored the other side. Stories were varied, but all came to the same conclusion. People were living in those woods. Some told stories of stumbling across makeshift shelters and tents surrounding a campfire. Others regaled tales of seeing shadowy figures dart behind trees in fear of seeing an outsider. Jesse and I were naturally curious and rambunctious, as most twin brothers could be. We scaled every inch of the trail, but reluctantly heeded our grandmother's warning of never venturing beyond the boundary. We were fascinated about what could be out there and discussed our theories before bed. Our friends were also outdoorsy, and our fascination with the uncharted territory soon became an obsession. "Well, why don't we just fucking do it?" our friend Mikey said while we shared a cigarette in the park. We looked at him quizzically. "We're about to start high school. Let's see what the damn fuss is about." Not seeing a reason not to, we devised a plan to trek the rest of our woods. It was me, Jesse, Mikey Bird, Wyatt Rhodes, and his older cousin Dewey, who had just received his Eagle Scout Award. Dewey was odd, but we felt a trained outdoorsman was the best person to lead the expedition. We decided to leave around 7:30 p.m., as my grandparents would be asleep, and my mom was still out of town for work. We'd get at least 1 hour of daylight before sunset to explore the forbidden green space. I remember feeling nervous as I laced my old hiking boots and carefully applied bug spray. We could hear Big Joe snoring in the other room, and Jesse and I snuck out the kitchen door and galloped toward Mikey's house. We were the last to arrive. Dewey was messing with his compass in his full Eagle Scout uniform while Wyatt and Mikey pensively shared another cigarette. We set off, gliding through the mile-long trail that led to the other side. The sun had shifted to a blood-orange hue, and we were surprised to see dark clouds loom overhead. "Huh," Dewey said, shifting his thick round glasses. "The weatherman didn't say there would be rain today." "Of course you watch the weather," Wyatt said, rolling his eyes while Mikey and I muffled our snickers. "Do we turn back?" Jesse asked before I reminded him that this might be our only chance. Mom would be back in town next weekend. "I ain't afraid of no rain," Mikey declared. The rest of us agreed and soldiered onto the rusty sign, stepping over it with ease. Jesse crossed last, and like clockwork, rain began to putter down from the sky. It was a light summer rain, hot to the touch and more pungent. None of us were particularly concerned until we heard a rumbling that sounded like thunder. I could tell Dewey was nervous, moving away from the tall southern oaks whose branches looked like arms trying to grab you. The sun was now entirely invisible, and we would not see it again until tomorrow. A feeling of unease loomed over us. It was hard to describe the other side. It looked exactly like any other part of the woods, but it felt odd. The trail leading up was teeming with the sounds of nature, from birds or other woodland creatures. But this part of the forest was silent, minus the rain. I kept looking over my shoulder as I swore I could see shadows darting in and out of my peripheral vision. Holy shit, Dewey stopped us. Look. In the distance was what looked like a church spire, though it was decayed with large chunks of wood missing. It was enormous and stared back at us over the tree line. Looks like there was a church after all, Jesse said. We should probably go, Dewey responded with his voice quivering. They said those folks have guns. Oh yeah? Well, check this out, Mikey said while pulling out a gleaming silver pistol from his backpack. Nabbed this from my dad's closet. I'll show them this if they try and fuck with us. We all immediately began arguing and cursing at Mikey for doing something so reckless. Wyatt started to turn back, but something made him stop in his tracks. We looked in his direction and saw something at the top of a hill. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. I couldn't really make out his face, though it appeared to sag and stare at us in a slack-jawed gaze. Mikey, the idiot he was, flashed his gun at the strange figure. The man seemed to glance at the weapon and sauntered back behind the hill, out of sight. Mikey smirked. Take that, you bitch. But to our horror, the man reappeared and charged toward us, tumbling down the hill while moaning from his open mouth. As he got closer, I saw that he was missing an eye. Mikey fired the pistol, but the shot was so loud that he dropped it in shock. The man barreled into us and knocked down Mikey while grunting and screaming from his mouth, wailing his arms on Mikey's body like a prehistoric primate. Dewey picked up his walking stick and smacked the man in the face before we darted deeper into the forest. My ears were still ringing when we collapsed in exhaustion in an unknown clearing. The tall spire was closer, and torrential rain slammed down on us. You're an idiot, Mikey. Wyatt sputtered, digging his knuckles into the soaked earth. We all stood up to brush ourselves off, eager to return home. But there was one issue. Dewey was missing. We started to panic, screaming for Dewey's name into what seemed like the void. Dewey had everything we needed to get out of there in his backpack. Now we were alone, shivering and unable to see far ahead of us. After finding our way for a bit, we heard whistling. I didn't know the tune back then, but now I know it was in the Hall of the Mountain King. The whistling echoed loudly through the forest, and we noticed it was coming directly from the spire. We followed the melody until we reached the bushes to the spire's entrance. The spire was not connected to any building, and it looked like it had been moved by a crane and onto the ground. A makeshift doorway was cut at the bottom. We could hear muttering and banging from inside the tower. Lightning lit up the room behind the entrance. There was a silhouette of a large man in the entryway. His back was turned to us, but it became clear it wasn't the man who attacked us earlier. The man, whistling his tune, then walked around back with something slumped over his shoulder, revealing a tied-up Dewey with terror in his eyes. We crept toward the spire and tried to untie Dewey, but the knots were too thick, and Jesse and I quit the Scouts after 3rd grade. I remember the smell being terrible, like rotten eggs and spoiled meat. Mikey found a table saw nearby and began furiously cutting the ropes until we freed Dewey. We have T.O. go now, he screamed, and we tumbled out of the spire, only to be greeted by the massive man from earlier. He was wearing a full rain suit, and an old welder's mask was on the top of his head. I remember him chuckling and then whistling like my grandpa did when it was time for supper. The floodlight from the top of the entrance lit up. I looked around and saw various heads pop out from under the bushes, each with their faces contorted in either rage or horror. There must have been a dozen figures, but I'm not sure I would call them human. The beasts leapt toward us, and Jesse helped me to my feet as we barreled through the trees. The sound of screaming and agonizing groans followed us, and I was too scared to even look back but heard the shuffling of legs chasing after me. We kept running until Dewey tripped over the chain boundary. The rest of us toppled over him with wet mud painting our faces. I whipped around and saw the reflections of a dozen eyes before they turned around and went back into the forest. We stayed on the ground for at least an hour, hyperventilating and cussing. I sat up when my heart rate finally slowed down and asked just what the hell had happened. Dewey, still exhausted, sputtered out what he saw. After hitting the man with his walking stick, an unknown figure grabbed Dewey, who put a funny-smelling cloth over his face, and he went unconscious. When he came to, he was tied to a metal pole and was staring at a wooden table with what looked like a mannequin lying on it. But Dewey soon realized it was a body. The figure returned and began muttering a language Dewey didn't understand. A flash of lightning hit the top of the spire and traveled down a wire to the table, causing the body to jolt and convulse before going silent. The man shook his head and left, and we came in to untie Dewey. We said nothing. Jesse and I didn't leave the house for almost a week until our mother returned from her work trip. We then uneventfully began the school year, never venturing to the other side. Except for Dewey. Dewey graduated from high school that year near the top of his class. I expected him to end up at Texas A&M or UT Austin. But instead, he disappeared. Some folks claimed to see him at local dives, chatting with itinerant strangers or spending most of his time on the trails. While smoking a joint by myself on the trail one night, I thought I saw Dewey slip behind the rusted chain and cross into the forest. Curious as to what he was up to, I followed him. I kept my distance, but Dewey walked forward purposefully, not bothering to even look down at his shoe. Even though I was a little stoned, it didn't take long to realize where he was headed. The spire soon came into view, and Dewey slipped behind some bushes. I knelt down to look and saw him dragging trash bags into the tower's entrance. Following him was the gargantuan man with the welder's mask we saw last summer. I ran as fast as I could back home. In the morning, my grandparents found several dead birds neatly aligned on their porch. They blamed our cat, Archie, but it felt like a warning to me. I was never going back to those woods ever again. Until last night, while blowing off some steam with Jesse, we ran into our old pal Wyatt. After shooting the breeze, I asked if Wyatt had heard from Cousin Dewey. Wyatt grimaced and shook his head. Turned into a recluse after y'all left for college. Did some time in county lockup for trespassing at the local cemetery around 10 years ago. Haven't seen him since. Jesse smirked. He always was an oddball, wasn't he? Wonder what he's up to now. I had a feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, until I had a horrifying realization. Our grandmother was laid to rest in that cemetery. The ground was probably still fresh under her headstone. I flew back to my grandparents' house from our motel in my truck. I tore into the old shed and took the carbine Grandpa Joe kept from his time in Vietnam. I ensured it was clean and set off on the trail, soon reaching the rusted chain boundary. I crossed the other side, feeling like I was stepping into a new dimension. The forest went silent, seeming untouched from when we were children. I carefully made my way toward the spire, gripping my grandfather's gun until my knuckles turned white. I think I hear faint whistling in the distance. I know I am being watched. I know I am being followed. Fifth story. Something followed me in the woods. Let me begin by saying I live in the South, so the woods was something I grew up with. I was always an outdoorsman and would often go climbing and exploring in the forest around where I lived. Sometimes I would go out to camp, chopping small trees, making fires, and practicing with my knives and machetes. I was never really scared of anything, to be honest, even at a young age. I always carried at least a fixed blade knife with me on my adventures and felt like I could take on anything that came my way. As I grew older, I didn't do this kind of thing as much, but I would go hiking quite often. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday, May 3rd, I decided I would go on an afternoon hike just to enjoy being outside. I still enjoyed the woods as much as I had when I was a kid. Now I think I actually appreciate it more. My senses are calibrated a lot better these days, so I am able to take in all the scenery and nature, which just feels peaceful. This Sunday seemed just like any other, and I got into my car to drive to my hiking spot. I'm not a fan of going on official hiking trails because the linear course and other people seem to dilute the wild. My spot is pretty out of the way, about an hour from my home, and no one else would have any reason to go there. It isn't marked at all, no signs, no fences, no footprints, nothing. It is just endless woods for miles and miles. I parked my car a pretty good distance from where I always entered, just in case anyone came by, although the dirt road was always completely deserted. Now that I think about it, I have never seen or even heard a car or other people over there. I set off on my walk through the woods, geared with my trail running shoes, a hat, and my 6-inch engraved knife in its sheath on my belt. I strolled along my normal route to start off with an expanse of lush green in all directions. I covered about 2 miles of flat ground, climbed a 20-foot boulder wall, and traversed across a small creek. I was just taking in everything around me. The cool breath of a breeze on my back, the sound of the flowing water filling my ears, and scanning the diverse landscape for any wildlife. I continued on my favorite path. It wasn't really a path, but I knew the woods pretty well at this point. Then I got to an area where I realized I had never gone off to the left. I'm not sure why I never went that way because I had pretty much explored all other directions in the vicinity. Not taking too much time to think about it, I headed left into the uncharted horizon. After a few more miles in this new direction, I started to get a strange feeling. It was an eerie kind of feeling, like something was off. I realized I hadn't seen or any animals over this way. No birds flying above. No squirrels shuffling on tree branches, not even any bugs making noises. Nothing. I brushed it off and continued my trek. I stopped here and there to examine different things, like strange markings on some of the trees, but there was nothing too exciting over here. I noticed the sun was started to descend and the darkness was creeping in. I had completely lost track of time exploring this new place. I left my home to go on my hike a little after noon, so I had to have been out there for 5 or 6 hours. I remember thinking how strange it was that the moon was already fairly high so early in the day. Time seems to go by in a different manner when I am out in the woods. I don't know why that is. I decided it was time to head back. I would have to hurry because it would be dark soon. I turned and set off in the direction I had come from. At least I thought I was. The woods were a lot denser in this section than the others I had explored in the opposite direction, so it was a lot harder to keep track of where I was. I soon realized I was kind of lost. I must have gotten turned around somewhere. Whenever I am in the woods, even an area I know well, I always leave a trail of some kind to guide me back. Every 30 feet or so I would bend a branch or occasionally make an X on a tree with my knife so it was clear I had been there. I kept trying to trace my steps, but I couldn't find any broken branches and I was getting a bit frustrated. I never made mistakes like this, so what the hell was going on? Just then I saw an X marked on a tree. Ah, there we go. No need to get worked up after all. I walked further looking for more signs. Then I saw another X. Then another. And another. All right. I definitely didn't carve that many trees, and there were still no broken branches at all. I was getting a little worried at this point. I continued on, hoping to see some form of familiarity, but I just kept seeing X markings. They were on almost every tree at this point. Now I know I had never been this far onto this side before, so these markings couldn't have been from me on previous visits. Plus, I would never be so foolish to make that many markings because it would just create confusion. I went to examine one of the markings and quickly realized that they were wider than my knife would cut, and a lot deeper. That's when the feeling hit me again. That eerie sense when you know something is wrong. That feeling that you're not alone. That feeling that you're being watched. Now, like I said, I have always been pretty fearless, but I'm not stupid. There are certain situations that even a knife and good instincts can't get you out of. Still, I was determined not to show fear. Maybe if I showed whoever was fucking with me that I wasn't going to take any shit, that they would show themselves or leave. The dark was getting thicker by the minute. I needed to get the fuck out of here now. I started walking slowly in what I thought was the right direction, listening for anything abnormal. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At one point, I finally thought I was just being paranoid and making shit up. Then I started to hear noises, all while the consuming darkness swept over the forest. The sound started off like small sticks breaking, then scratching of tree bark, then leaves rustling violently, then branches being torn off trees. I looked in every direction, but it was getting harder and harder to see with night looming down fast and my eyes unadjusted. My hand gripped the hilt of my knife tight and I started moving a faster pace. I was getting really freaked out. The next sound came much louder than all the rest. It sounded closer. I turned to where it was coming from. That's when I saw him. I could barely make out a dark figure off in the distance. The moonlight was beaming down. It was one of the brightest moons I have ever seen. It still provided an illumination through the thick canopy of trees overhead. This guy looked big. Like really big. There was no way I could take a guy that big normally. With a knife I maybe stood a chance. That is if he wasn't armed with anything. I could see him start walking in my direction, getting closer and closer. Then I noticed that he walked in a very strange way, and I couldn't see any outline of clothing. He was covered in something. As he moved closer, I realized just how big it was. There is no way a man can be that big. There aren't any big game in the area I live. The biggest things we have are deer and coyotes. This thing looked like the size of a bear, but I knew that was impossible. Bears didn't live anywhere near here, like not even in this state. I started walking backwards, drawing my knife slowly, not wanting to take my eyes off of this thing. Just as I pulled my knife fully from the sheath, it started running full speed. On all fours. I have never run so fast in my entire life. Within seconds, my hat was off my head, falling behind me carelessly. My legs were in overdrive as I sprinted in the opposite direction of whatever animal was chasing me. I wasn't going to stop. There is no fucking way I am going to stop, I told myself. I could hear it behind me, gaining on me with tremendous speed. I was too terrified to look over my shoulder, but I could feel it right on my heels. I started weaving through the trees, still going at full speed. This seemed to throw it off a little, like it didn't expect a good old-fashioned serpentine pattern. I felt it get a little further behind me and continued to dodge and weave through the branches and trees. The sound of branches snapping with ease was the only audible noise in my mind. I still thought I might be able to lose it. That was until I reached a clearing where the small creek stretched through the woods. Open area. Fuck. I at least knew where I was now. I tore through the last of the trees and was making my way to the creek. The creek was pretty wide here, but there were some rocks dividing the water into different streams. I leapt to one rock and then to another. It was too dark to see clearly, and I was moving so fast that I didn't have time to check my surroundings appropriately. As my foot hit the second rock, I felt it slide out from under me. It felt like I was falling in slow motion, and I could clearly hear the beast right behind me. I caught myself with my free arm, but still went face first into the water. Without a second's hesitation, I hurled myself back up and jumped out of the creek, all in one fluid motion. I honestly wasn't sure I was going to make it at this point. I could hear intense grunts and growls right on my ass as I tried to start running again. Suddenly, I couldn't go forward. Something pulled me back by my ankle. I had almost forgotten the knife clutched like a dagger in my right hand. It was like an extension of my body at this point. I spun on pure instinct as the immense force pulled me back and tried to slash with my blade. I must have hit because my knife didn't come back as I swung my body in the other direction when the grip on my ankle released. Then I heard the most terrifying cry, sounding like nothing I had ever heard before. It cracked through the silence of the forest, creating a void of pure terror. I said I ran faster than I ever had before, but that is not true. In this moment, I ran faster than humanly possible. I guess it was that fight or flight response people always talk about. I didn't look back once as the foul cries filled the air. I just ran. After what seemed like hours, I finally saw the break in the tree line where the dirt road was. I sprinted on fumes to my car, grabbed the keys from the back tire, and took off. As I drove off, I could still hear cries and howls in the distance, but nothing else. When I had twisted my body to strike at the creature, I got a glimpse of it fully. It was not a fucking bear. It was not a fucking coyote. I don't know what the fuck it was. I had never seen eyes like that. I had never seen teeth like that. The image pulsed through my mind all the way home, but I made it. I made it out alive. I survived. When I got home, I took some time to compose myself, sure I was safe. I needed a hot shower to clean off and soothe my terrified mind. It wasn't until I got out of the shower that I noticed the long, deep gash on the back of my calf. Maybe I nicked it on something as I was running. The adrenaline had kept the pain at bay, I guess. I quickly cleaned it and bandaged it. I took some sleeping pills that night because I knew there was no way I was going to fall asleep on my own. The most bizarre thing is that when I woke up the next day and removed my bandage, there was no wound. It was a completely healed scar, just a faint line of the large cut I had seen the night before. I still don't understand how that is possible. Ever since that night, I've felt strange. I haven't felt like myself, and it gets worse every day. It doesn't feel like a sickness. Hell, I feel stronger than ever. It just feels like I'm not fully in control. All I know is that I can never go back to that spot. I still feel like I hear that howl every night in my dreams, but it has to be just a dream, right? Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.